Okay, so I just wanted to talk you through this summary. So through that chapter, Foucault is saying that particular ways of talking about things shape the way that we see the world and our own selves. For example, all of the eras of sexism against women, talking about women in a negative way, the silly housewife or the damsel in distress or the young princess, all that kind of stuff, is obviously going to impact how we in the future generations see ourselves and our place in society, and also our identity and the expectations that are set upon us to be able to be a functioning woman in current society. So when you look at magazines or media texts that are challenging, especially to do with the idea of female identity, then that conversation changes the way that we can see ourselves. So the suffragettes, for example, they created this discourse. So they started talking about women in the political sphere, and that changed the way that women saw themselves. They never thought about themselves like that before. It was always, born, marriage, kids, death, and that was it. That was their role. So that idea of power and resistance to the dominant messages in society is hopeful, because there is always room for more discussion, and things like social media, Twitter, Facebook, all that kind of stuff, all these public forums and all this user generated content is also a space to be able to have that discussion, which 50 years ago never existed. So he's saying that popular media at the moment is obviously the first way for the dissemination, means like the way that it gets out. So if you disseminate something, you cut it up into bits and you send the message out to different sources. So, and what he's saying basically is that the media at the moment is the main place where we get the information about what's going on in society today and what our identity should be. Okay, so the most popular conversations about our identity happen through the media, essentially, because it's so accessible. And he's saying that also, where he's saying the ability to influence a certain discourse is a form of power that can be exercised. So institutions that have the power over the main channels in the media, so the TV networks, the news stations, the film industry, if you've got that power, then you can influence what that conversation is. So Rupert Murdoch, for example, has most of the media industry in his little hand. So he's able to easily influence the messages that are being communicated about something like identity to the people, essentially. So, but he's saying that it's not just held by one particular group, but it's something that flows. Okay, so again, going back to that triangle and that idea of Fisk. So audiences have power and they can resist the messages through the media. They can reject products, and then the institution has to bend their way and take into account what the feedback that they're getting, and then therefore the audience have power. And also exercising power will always produce resistance. If someone tells you sit down and you don't want to sit down, you don't have to sit down. So it's similar with this. And in that sense, power is productive because it causes things to happen. Okay, so that's why people protest, that's why people campaign, because it's positive, productive resistance to what's going on in the wider society. Although that might not be the intended consequence by the original person. So there are people who've thrown stuff out into the media world and society and caused all sorts of havoc. So there was a guy who did a meme with Osama bin Laden and Bert from the Muppets, which caused an internet storm, and he wasn't intending that, but it opened up a discussion about terrorism, and it exploded like worldwide. So it can start with small things. It's like ripples in a pond. And he mentions here that sexuality and identity are strong areas for people to discuss, because we are so concerned with it as people, as humans. So I go back to saying that like I did in previous chapters, that humans naturally just want to know who they are and where they fit in society. Otherwise, you'd be a sort of single ghost wandering around the world, not really making relationships or communicating or, developing as a person. And there's this focus on, knowing your sexuality especially, and that's going to be your key to happiness and knowing your true self. So go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, to reach the peak of self-actualization, you need to fill in all the blocks underneath. Otherwise, the pyramid will collapse. So it says in there, love, belonging, sex, sexuality, identity, and then you can be a fully functioning human person. So I hope that makes sense.